They said my past would haunt me forever, that I was nothing more than a girl without roots, a mistake carried from one country into another. They said I'd always be the outsider, the adopted kid who didn't belong to a family, to a nation, to a team. They thought those words would chain me, crush me, silence me. But they didn't know that every chain makes a sound when it breaks. And mine was about to echo across the world. They told me that my past would haunt me forever, that being born in one country and raised in another meant I would never truly belong anywhere. They said adoption was a scar that would never fade, a constant reminder that I was different, misplaced, unwanted. And for years, I believed those voices. I believed that my story had already been written, and that the ending was not mine to change. But the truth is, scars are not chains. They are proof that we survived, and the story you carry, no matter how painful, no matter how heavy, can become the very reason you rise higher than anyone ever imagined. This is not just my story. It is a story for anyone who has ever felt out of place, for anyone who has ever been told they were not enough, for anyone who has ever looked in the mirror and wondered if they truly belonged. What you're about to hear is more than a sports story. It's about finding identity when the world tries to take it from you. It's about standing tall when others try to define you by your past. It's about the long nights, the silent tears, the invisible battles, and the moment when pain transforms into power. And here's what this video will deliver. Not just a story of victory, but a reminder that your beginning does not decide your ending. That no matter where you come from, no matter how many times you've been pushed aside, there is strength inside you waiting to be revealed. By the time you reach the end, you won't just see how I rewrote my destiny, you'll see how you can rewrite yours. If stories like this move you, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now, because every week we bring you powerful journeys of struggle, judgment, and redemption. Hit that like button so more people can feel this message, and let's build a community that believes in resilience and hope. And in the comments, tell us, from which country and city are you watching this story? Because no matter where you are, this channel is proof that struggle and triumph speak a language we all understand. They said my past would haunt me forever. And maybe, for a long time, I believed it would. I didn't choose the place where I was born. I didn't choose the moment when someone decided I didn't belong to them. I didn't choose to be placed on the other side of the world in the arms of someone who chose me instead. But those choices, made long before I could even speak, became the shadows I carried everywhere. I grew up in Delaware, in the arms of my adoptive mother, who gave me love as fierce as any parent ever could. But no matter how much warmth she gave me, there was always that whisper around me. She's adopted. She's not really one of us. It didn't matter that I spoke the same language, studied in the same schools, or dreamed the same dreams. The fact that my skin, my eyes, my origin were different, that was enough for some to question if I truly belonged. And children can be cruel. I remember standing in the schoolyard, hearing the laughs, the questions, "Where's your real mom?" Or "Why don't you look like her?" They didn't understand the weight their words carried, but I did. Every question was a cut, every laugh was a scar, and every scar made me wonder if maybe they were right. I was small, fragile, and quiet. The kind of kid you don't notice unless you're looking for someone to make fun of. And in those moments, I felt invisible, except for the things that made me different. But there was one place where I wasn't invisible: the gym. The first time I stepped onto a gymnastics mat, something shifted. My body felt awkward, my movements uncertain, but there was a strange sense of freedom there. No one asked me about where I was from. No one cared if I looked different. The only thing that mattered was whether I could hold myself on the bar, land on my feet, or balance on that narrow beam. For the first time, I wasn't the adopted kid. I was just a girl learning how to fly. That feeling saved me. It gave me a space where I could forget the whispers, the questions, the shadows of my past. Every fall was painful, every mistake embarrassing, but each time I got up, I felt something grow inside me, a stubbornness, a fire that refused to go out. But the whispers didn't stop when I left school. Sometimes, they followed me into the gym. Parents looked at me differently. Coaches wondered if I had what it took, not just because of my size or skill, but because of something deeper. The belief that I would never truly represent a place I wasn't born in. It hurt. It broke me down in ways I can't fully explain. Because how do you fight a battle against something you never chose? How do you defend yourself against a past written before you could even walk? And yet, every time I put my hands on the mat, every time I climbed onto the beam, I felt like I was writing a new page. I couldn't change where I came from. But maybe, just maybe, I could change where I was going. I still remember the first time I stayed in the gym after everyone left. The lights were dim, the silence heavy, and it was just me, my body aching, my palms red from gripping the bars. I repeated the same move over and over, failing, falling, crying, and then trying again. It wasn't about proving something to the bullies anymore. It wasn't even about proving something to myself. It was about survival. It was about needing a place where I could be more than just the girl with the past. And in those long nights, I found something I didn't know I had: resilience. But resilience alone wasn't enough. Not yet, because every time I walked into the world outside the gym, the questions returned, sharper than before. Why do you try so hard? You'll never really fit in. You'll never really belong. And deep inside, I wondered, were they right? The gym became more than just a place to train. It became my shelter. When the whispers outside grew too heavy, when the stares reminded me I didn't belong, I found comfort in the smell of chalk, in the echo of my feet hitting the mat, in the rhythm of routines that demanded all of me. But it wasn't easy. In fact, nothing about gymnastics was ever easy. My body was small, fragile, not built like the powerful athletes I admired on TV. My arms trembled when I lifted myself on the bars. My legs wobbled with every attempt at balance on the beam. The floor felt endless, swallowing me whole as I tried to dance across it. I wasn't a prodigy. I wasn't the girl who made things look effortless. I was the one who stayed longer, who fell harder, who cried more quietly when no one was watching. And yet, every failure pulled me back again. There was something addictive about chasing what felt impossible. Every fall on the beam whispered to me, "You're not good enough." Every slip on the bars mocked me, "You'll never make it." But instead of breaking me, those voices fueled me. Because if the world was going to doubt me, then I had no choice but to outwork them all. I remember nights when the gym was nearly dark, the hum of the lights above me the only sound left. My coach had gone home. My teammates were already showered and asleep. And there I was, hands blistered, wrists taped, repeating the same move again and again until my body collapsed. My mother would wait in the car, sometimes for hours, never complaining, because she knew this wasn't just about sport. It was about survival. There's a strange kind of loneliness in that. To fight battles no one else sees, to keep pushing when no one is cheering. To build strength in silence, with no guarantee that the world will ever notice. I was training not just against gravity, but against every doubt spoken about me. Against every cruel word from kids who didn't know the weight of what they said. Against the fear that they might be right. And still, doubts crawled back in when I left the gym. School didn't get easier. My small victories on the mat didn't erase the questions about my adoption. About my identity. About whether I could ever truly represent the stars and stripes. I felt like I was building a fortress inside the gym, only to watch it crumble the moment I stepped back into the outside world. But that fortress, weak as it sometimes felt, was also shaping me. Every lonely night, every blistered hand, every bruised shin carved something into me that no one could take away. Discipline. And discipline, I would learn, can outlast almost anything. Discipline meant skipping birthday parties because practice came first. It meant homework finished in the back seat of the car under the glow of a streetlight, while my mother drove us home from late practices. It meant missing sleepovers, school dances, and afternoons at the mall, because I knew every hour I wasted was an hour someone else was getting ahead of me. And in a world where I already felt behind, where I already felt like I had something to prove, I couldn't afford to give up a single second. There were moments when I hated it, when I stared at my taped wrists and wondered why I kept doing this to myself. Why I chose pain over rest, isolation over belonging. But every time I thought of quitting, I imagined the whispers winning. I imagined the faces of the kids at school who told me I wasn't one of them. I imagined the quiet judgments of parents who doubted me, and the thought of proving them right scared me more than the thought of breaking my body. So I pushed. I kept pushing even when my muscles screamed. I kept pushing when my hands bled from the bars and my ankles burned from landing wrong. I kept pushing because deep inside, I believed that if I suffered enough now, one day, the suffering would transform into something greater. And maybe that belief was the only thing keeping me alive in those years. Because I wasn't winning medals yet, I wasn't a name anyone recognized. But I was the girl who stayed. The girl who refused to quit. The girl who chose sweat over silence, pain over comfort, effort over acceptance. And maybe that was the point. Because even though the world didn't see me yet, even though the whispers still stung, Every routine I fought through in that empty gym was building towards something I couldn't yet see. The first time I walked into a real competition, my heart nearly broke through my chest. The gym was crowded with parents, coaches, and kids who all seemed taller, stronger, more confident than me. The lights felt too bright, the air too heavy, and every step I took echoed louder than it should have. For weeks, I had trained routines until my body ached, but in that moment, standing on the edge of the floor, I wasn't sure I remembered any of them. I could hear the whispers again. They weren't always directed at me, but they found their way into my head anyway. She's so small. She doesn't look like the others. Do you think she'll even finish her routine? Their words blurred with the pounding in my ears, and I felt like I was drowning before I even started. When the judge signaled, I forced myself to move. My feet touched the mat, my arms stretched, and for a second, I almost believed I could do this. But halfway through, nerves betrayed me. My ankle buckled on a landing, my body tumbled, and the crowd gasped. Heat flushed my face as I scrambled back up, pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending the fall didn't shatter me inside. The routine ended with shaky applause. I knew it wasn't sympathy, it was relief that it was finally over. My score flashed, lower than almost everyone else. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it sat there, heavy and sharp. I told myself I'd do better on the beam. I told myself I'd find balance. But the beam was merciless. Halfway across, doubt crept into my legs, and before I knew it, I was on the floor again. The crowd's silence was worse than laughter. Silence meant disappointment. Silence meant confirmation of what they already believed, that I didn't belong. Afterward, in the locker room, I stared at my taped ankles and trembling hands. Tears came before I could stop them. What hurt wasn't the fall, it was the feeling that every eye in the room saw my weakness, that my mistakes had written my story for me. But my coach came in, sat down quietly beside me, and said words I never forgot. Everyone falls. What matters is who learns from it. It didn't feel like enough in that moment, but those words lodged themselves deep inside me. They became the seed of something I didn't yet understand. The next competition wasn't much different. My routines were cleaner, but the fear still clung to me like a second skin. I saw parents whispering to each other, shaking their heads as if to say, "She won't last long." I overheard another gymnast mutter under her breath, "Why does she even try?" Those words burned. They lit fires I didn't know how to control. I wanted to scream, to prove them wrong, but the only weapon I had was work. And work, I would learn, can scream louder than any voice. So I began to treat every fall differently. Instead of shame, I forced myself to see lessons. If I slipped on the bar, I drilled the grip until my palms blistered. If I fell off the beam, I practiced balance until my legs shook. If I stumbled on the floor, I repeated the sequence until my body could move without thought. Slowly, painfully, I realized that failure wasn't my enemy. It was my teacher. The competitions kept coming, and so did the mistakes. But each one cut less deeply, because each one carried a lesson that made me sharper, tougher, harder to break. Still, there were nights I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the echoes of laughter that no longer existed but lived rent-free in my mind. Nights when I wondered if I was chasing a dream, too big for someone like me. Nights when I thought of quitting, of choosing a quieter life where no one would watch me fall. But then I remembered the silence in the crowd. That silence wasn't just judgment, it was fuel. If I could endure it now, maybe one day I'd turn it into applause. And so, with every stumble, I kept moving forward. My body carried bruises. My pride carried wounds. But my heart carried something stronger. The refusal to let anyone else write my ending. Progress doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes, it comes in silence, in small details only you can notice. And for me, progress was invisible at first. In the gym, I began to land moves I once thought were impossible. My legs no longer trembled every time I mounted the beam. My hands found a steadier grip on the bars. My breath grew more controlled on the floor, as if my body was finally learning to listen to me instead of fighting me. They were small victories, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to me, they were everything. Yet outside of those walls, no one seemed to care. At competitions, my scores still lagged behind. Parents whispered, coaches raised eyebrows, and teammates gave polite smiles that felt more like pity than respect. I could see it in their eyes, they didn't believe I would ever break through. And sometimes, neither did I, but I kept showing up. That became my identity before anything else. I was the girl who never left the gym when practice ended. The girl who stayed until the janitor turned off the lights. The girl who taped her hands until they were raw, then taped them again. There were days my mother begged me to rest, to give myself a break, to live like a normal teenager. But normal never saved me. Normal was the world that doubted me, the world that laughed at me. Normal was the box they wanted me to stay in. And if I wanted to escape it, I couldn't afford normal. So I sacrificed. I traded sleepovers for practice. I traded parties for conditioning. I traded an easy life for a life that felt like war. Every routine, every repetition, every bruise was a battle I fought against the whispers in my head telling me I would never be enough. And in that invisible war, I started to change. One night, after hours of training alone, I landed a dismount on the beam so clean, so perfect, that I froze for a second, stunned by what I had done. No one clapped. No one saw. It was just me, standing in the empty gym, with tears streaming down my face. But for the first time, I realized that recognition wasn't the only measure of success. Growth was. Still, the silence outside the gym didn't go away. Coaches still questioned if I had the talent to go far. Other gymnasts still dismissed me as the girl who worked hard but lacked the spark. Even my own mind betrayed me, whispering doubts late at night when exhaustion left me vulnerable. And yet, I kept climbing. Because what they couldn't see was the foundation being built under the surface. Every lonely practice was another brick. Every invisible victory was another layer of strength. I was building something bigger than scores or applause. I was building myself, but there was also anger, a fire that grew stronger each time I was overlooked, each time my progress was ignored. That anger became fuel. When my muscles screamed, I screamed louder inside. When my body wanted to quit, I reminded myself that quitting would only make their whispers true, and I couldn't allow that, so I pushed harder. I demanded more from myself than anyone else ever would, because if they weren't going to believe in me, then I had to believe enough for all of us. Looking back, those invisible years were some of the most important of my life. They didn't make headlines, they didn't win medals, but they built the resilience I would need for everything that came next. Because progress, no matter how invisible, doesn't stay hidden forever. One day, the world would see. One day, they would have no choice but to notice. Competitions became bigger, louder, heavier. The gyms I once thought were intimidating now looked small compared to the arenas filled with rows of seats, banners hanging high, and crowds buzzing with expectation. And with each step up and level, the pressure didn't just grow, it multiplied. I remember walking into one of my first major meets, staring at the girls lined up beside me. They were taller, stronger, sharper. Their leotards shimmered under the lights, their movements already polished, like professionals. I felt like a shadow in their glow, a name that didn't belong on the roster. The announcer called our names, and as they cheered for the favorites, the crowd's noise dipped when mine was mentioned. It was a reminder that I wasn't the one they came to see. I wasn't the one they expected to win. I was just there. And comparison is a cruel game. Every wobble of mine was magnified because someone else had landed perfectly. Every fall of mine echoed louder because someone else soared. The judges' pens moved quicker for the girls, who seemed destined for greatness, while mine hovered, hesitant, reluctant. I gave everything I had. I landed some routines clean, fought hard through others. But the scoreboard rarely reflected the fight inside me. My numbers were good but never good enough. The gap between me and the top was wide, and everyone saw it. After one meet, I overheard a coach from another team say, "She works hard, but she's not built for this. She'll never make it to the top." His voice cut sharper than any fall. Because hard work, in their eyes, would never be enough. I carried that weight with me everywhere. It lived in my chest when I trained. It lived in my mind when I tried to sleep. I started to wonder if maybe I was training for nothing, if I was sacrificing everything just to remain invisible. And yet, every time I thought of quitting, something inside me snapped back. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the belief that consistency showing up, refusing to break, refusing to disappear was the one thing I could control. So I doubled down. If they had talent, I would have endurance. If they had natural grace, I would have unshakable grit. If they sparkled under the lights, I would outlast them in the dark. The meets kept coming, and though I didn't win, I began to notice something. I wasn't falling as often. My landings were cleaner. My scores, though still modest, crept higher with each competition. I wasn't a star yet, but I was no longer at the bottom. That progress mattered to me. even if the world still refused to notice. I started to believe that comparison was a game I could never win, but consistency was a game I could master. Still, the judgment never stopped. Parents in the stands whispered that I was wasting time. Competitors smirked when I stumbled. Even some coaches questioned if it was worth pushing me further. But in those moments, I reminded myself, they didn't see the hours I spent alone in the gym. They didn't see the sacrifices my mother and I made every single day. They didn't see the fire that kept me alive when the silence of doubt tried to drown me. And if they couldn't see it now, then one day, I would force them to. Because I wasn't just fighting for scores or medals anymore. I was fighting to belong. I was fighting to prove that the weight of comparison couldn't crush someone who refused to quit. By the time I reached the next stage of competitions, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the scared little girl trembling on the beam anymore. I wasn't flawless, not even close, but I was steadier, cleaner, more focused. And though the world hadn't noticed yet, I felt the difference every time I stepped onto the mat. This meet was different. Bigger crowd, brighter lights, judges who seemed colder and sharper. It wasn't just another weekend event. It was a stage where reputations were made, where scouts watched, where whispers turned into decisions that could shape a future. I knew walking in that no one expected me to matter. My name wasn't highlighted on the program. No one pointed at me when the favorites warmed up. I was still invisible till I wasn't. The moment I touched the bars, something clicked. My body moved with a rhythm I had fought for through years of pain. My hands blistered, but they held strong. My dismount wasn't perfect, but I landed solidly, feet firm on the mat. The silence of doubt didn't sting this time, it felt like respect, even if they didn't want to admit it. As I walked away, I caught sight of a few parents exchanging glances. Not mocking ones, this time confused ones. Like they couldn't quite believe what they had seen. For the first time, I felt it, doubt shifting away from me and into them. But gymnastics is cruel. One good routine doesn't erase mistakes that come later. On the beam, I hesitated halfway through, fear gripping my stomach. For a split second, I thought I'd fall again. My knees bent, my arms wavered, but somehow, I stayed on. The crowd gasped not because they expected greatness from me, but because they expected failure. When I didn't give it to them, their silence was louder than applause. By the time I reached the floor, my chest was burning, my legs heavy. I wasn't competing against the girls next to me. I was competing against the version of me that used to crumble. And step by step, turn by turn, I realized I was holding my ground. The scores flashed at the end. Not first, not even close. But higher than I had ever placed before. Higher than some of the girls who used to laugh at me. Higher than a few of the names that once seemed untouchable. It wasn't victory, not the kind you read about, not the kind that earns medals. But to me, it felt like a door cracking open. For the first time, I had proof that the fortress I'd been building in silence wasn't just in my head. It was real. Afterward, in the locker room, I overheard a different kind of whisper. One gymnast said to another, "She's getting better. Did you see that bar routine?" It wasn't praise exactly, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, after years of invisibility, felt like gold, but with acknowledgement came something else, pressure. If they were beginning to notice me, then mistakes would hurt more. If they started to expect something from me, then failure would cut deeper. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My body ached, my hands burned, but my mind was louder than anything else. Was this the beginning of something greater or just a cruel tease before another fall? For years, I begged to be noticed. For years, I wanted nothing more than for the world to see me, to stop overlooking me, to stop doubting that I even belonged on the same floor as the others. But when the recognition finally came, it didn't feel like I thought it would. It didn't feel light, it felt heavy like chains of a different kind. At my next competition, people actually watched when my name was called. Their eyes didn't glaze over this time. Coaches leaned forward. Parents hushed their conversations. My teammates glanced at me, waiting to see what I would do. It was everything I had wanted and it terrified me. Because now, if I failed, they would notice that too. The bars came first. My hands shook as I chalked them, not from weakness, but from the weight of expectation pressing down on me. When I launched into the air, the movements I had drilled thousands of times felt foreign. Like my body had forgotten how to trust itself under their gaze. I landed, but it wasn't clean. My score reflected that, and as I stepped off the mat, I felt the stares again, not dismissive this time, but judging, measuring. On the beam, the fear grew louder. Balance had always been my test, but now it felt like walking on a blade. My arms stretched, my eyes focused, but my heart wouldn't slow down. I wobbled twice, nearly fell once, but somehow made it across. The relief was drowned out by frustration. I hadn't fallen, but I hadn't impressed anyone either. And then came the floor. The music started, the crowd quieted, and I tried to lose myself in the rhythm. For a few moments, I did. My body flowed, my jumps landed, my turns spun with precision. But in the final pass, exhaustion betrayed me. My foot slipped, my knee touched, and the gasp from the crowd stabbed deeper than the fall itself. When the scores were posted, I was middle of the pack. Not terrible, not brilliant, just there again, but this time, being just there hurt more than ever. Because once you're seen, invisibility doesn't feel like safety anymore. It feels like failure. Back in the gym, I trained harder than ever. Every wobble became an enemy. Every fall felt like a betrayal. I pushed myself to exhaustion, sometimes collapsing on the mat, gasping for air, tears mixing with sweat. My coach warned me not to burn out, but how could I stop? If I slowed down, the whispers would return. If I failed, the respect I had just begun to earn would vanish. My mother worried too. She saw the bruises on my legs, the tape around my wrists, the way I limped after long practices. She begged me to rest, to remember that I was human. But I didn't feel human anymore. I felt like a weapon being sharpened relentlessly, mercilessly. At night, sleep refused to come. I replayed every mistake, every stumble, every look from the judges that told me I wasn't enough. I clutched my pillow, heart pounding, mind racing, asking myself if I was chasing a dream that was already breaking me. And yet, the next morning, I was back in the gym. Because as much as the pressure hurt, the thought of giving into it hurt more. The first time I walked into a national-level competition, it felt like stepping into another universe. The air itself was different, charged with a kind of electricity I had never felt before. The banners were bigger, the lights harsher, the crowds louder, and the gymnasts standing beside me. They looked like giants, not just in size, but in presence. Their names were already whispered with respect. Their routines were already rehearsed for perfection. They weren't just girls anymore. They were stars in the making. And then there was me. I felt small again, like the outsider I thought I had outgrown. My leotard didn't shine the same way. My name wasn't written in the programs with bold letters. No one in the stands had come to watch me. I was just a shadow, hoping not to be swallowed whole by their brilliance. But shadows don't disappear under bright lights. They stand out in different ways. As I warmed up, I couldn't help but compare myself. Their flips seemed effortless, their landings precise. My movements felt heavier, like every ounce of effort was visible. I knew I didn't have their grace, their natural brilliance. What I had was sweat, discipline, and scars no one could see. When the competition began, the arena roared for the favorites. Every perfect landing earned thunderous applause. Every elegant routine was met with admiration. When it was my turn, the silence returned. Not cruel, not mocking, but indifferent, and somehow, that silence hurt more than all the whispers I had ever endured. I launched myself onto the bars, every muscle burning with the memory of endless hours alone in the gym. My grip was firm, my swings strong, my dismount cleaner than ever before. When I landed, my feet steady, a small cheer broke through the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was real, and in that moment, I felt something shift. On the beam, my old enemy, I fought with every ounce of focus I had. My arms steadied, my core tightened, and when my foot slipped slightly, I refused to fall. I finished strong, and though the judges didn't reward me with dazzling scores, I knew I had survived a battlefield that had once destroyed me. The floor was last. My music began, and I moved as if my life depended on it. Every leap, every twist, every tumble carried the weight of years of doubt. By the end, I collapsed onto the mat, chest heaving, body trembling, but I had given everything. The scoreboard didn't place me first. It didn't even place me near the top, but it placed me higher than I had ever been before. Higher than some who once looked down on me. Higher than I had dared to hope, and in that placement, invisible to most, I saw proof. Proof that the gap between me and the giants wasn't unbreakable. Proof that discipline could carve cracks into the walls built by natural talent. Proof that maybe I belonged here after all. Still, the doubts didn't vanish. I saw the way coaches shook their heads, unimpressed. I heard the way parents praised the favorites and ignored me. I felt the weight of comparison pressing harder than ever. But underneath that weight, something else was forming. A defiance, a hunger. Because I realized then that I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for every outsider, every kid who was told they didn't belong, every adopted child who wondered if their story ended with rejection, every whisper that said origin mattered more than effort. And I promised myself, one day they would see me. One day the silence would turn into thunder. There comes a moment in every journey when the silence shifts. When the whispers of doubt grow quieter, replaced by something else. Not applause, not yet, but attention. And for the first time in my life, I felt it. It started with the way my coaches looked at me. For years, their eyes had skimmed past me, focusing on the prodigies, the girls who seemed destined for greatness. But now, when I landed a dismount clean, when I balanced steady on the beam, I caught them watching longer, measuring me, considering me. It wasn't praise, but it was something. And that something meant everything. In training camps, I began to notice shifts in the atmosphere. Teammates who once dismissed me now asked how I kept my grip so firm, how I fought through exhaustion. They didn't say it kindly, but they said it. And their questions were acknowledgement that I had earned my place among them. But progress always came at a price. My body carried bruises like armor. My wrists throbbed at night, my ankles swelled, my muscles screamed. Some mornings I woke up and wondered how I would even stand, let alone train. But pain had long ago stopped being an obstacle. It had become part of my identity. And still, the shadows of my past clung to me. Even as I rose in rankings, even as my scores climbed, I heard the doubts echo in my head. She's adopted. She's not really one of us. She doesn't belong. Those voices had lived with me too long to vanish overnight. And in the quiet moments, I wondered if I was only fighting ghosts. But ghosts can be fuel. And every time I stepped into the gym, I carried them with me not as chains, but as fire. The breakthrough came in a competition that was supposed to be routine. I wasn't the favorite. No one expected me to stand out. But when I hit the bars, everything connected. My swing was strong, my release clean, my landing solid. The crowd cheered louder than I'd ever heard for me. On the beam, my old enemy, I walked steady, arms sharp, movements crisp, no wobbles, no falls. And when I saluted at the end, I saw something in the judge's eyes I had never seen before. Respect. The scoreboard lit up. My placement was higher than I had ever dreamed. Not first, but near enough to make people turn their heads. Near enough to make coaches whisper my name. Near enough to remind me that the silence could no longer ignore me. Afterward, one of the gymnasts I had admired for years walked past me, glanced at me, and said quietly, "Nice routine." 2 words, that's all. But for me, it felt like a crown. That night, I cried in my room not from sadness, but from something I had never truly felt before. Belief. Belief that I wasn't just surviving. Belief that I could actually rise. Still, the path ahead was steep. The national stage wasn't the end game. The whispers hadn't fully vanished. And I knew that recognition was only the beginning of a heavier burden. Expectation. But deep down, I also knew this. I had walked through silence, through whispers, through shadows. And now that the world had started to see me, I wouldn't let them look away again. Because if the world thought my past would haunt me forever, then they were about to see how wrong they were. Training for the World Championships was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Everything became sharper, harder, heavier. The gym wasn't just a place of sweat anymore, it was a battlefield. My coaches demanded perfection in every detail, from the point of my toes to the angle of my landings. My body ached in places I didn't even know existed, wrists taped, ankles swollen, muscles screaming. I lived in a constant state of pain. And yet I welcomed it, because pain meant progress. Pain meant I was closer than ever to something bigger than myself. But with progress came pressure. Not just the pressure to perform, but the pressure to represent. To wear the flag of a country that wasn't the one I was born in. To prove that I deserved to stand under the stars and stripes. To silence the whispers that adoption made me less. That origin defined me. That no matter how high I climbed, I would never truly belong. At night, those whispers were louder than ever. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I deserved this. If I failed, would it prove them right? If I stumbled, would it confirm that I was never truly one of them? The doubts cut deeper than the training. Because pain in the body can be taped, iced, healed, but pain in the heart, that lingers. Still, every morning, I got up before the sun, tied my hair back, and stepped into the gym. My hands blistered, my arms shook, but I refused to quit. My coach once told me, the beam doesn't care where you're from. The bars don't care who your parents are. The floor doesn't care what your story is. It only cares how much you give. And I clung to those words like oxygen. In those weeks, I sacrificed everything else. Friends disappeared. School became a blur. My world shrank to a single mission: prove that I belonged. Prove that effort could rewrite destiny. Prove that the girl they once overlooked could carry a nation on her shoulders. The day I received my leotard with USA stitched across the chest, I held it in my hands for what felt like hours. The fabric was light, but the weight was crushing. That flag wasn't just a symbol of a country, it was a symbol of every whisper I had ever heard, every doubt I had ever carried, and now, I would wear it in front of the world. I looked in the mirror, dressed in red, white, and blue. For a moment, I didn't see the girl from the schoolyard. I didn't see the outsider, the mistake, the adopted child. I saw a gymnast, a fighter, a representative, but deep down, the question still lingered. Would the world see me the same way? The World Championships arrived. The arena was massive, a cathedral of sport, filled with thousands of eyes. Cameras flashed. Broadcasters spoke names with reverence. The favorites walked in with confidence, their heads high, their reputations preceding them. And then came me. The announcer called my name. The applause was polite, uncertain. I walked forward, heart pounding, flag on my chest, shadows of my past whispering in my ears. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I had fought too long to let fear own me now. Still, as I stepped onto the mat, one thought echoed louder than the rest. This was it. Every sacrifice, every scar, every whisper, all of it lead here. And I had only one chance to prove that I belonged. The arena lights felt hotter than the sun. The air was thick, heavy with expectation, and every breath scraped against my lungs. My name echoed through the loudspeakers, and for a split second, I felt like that little girl again, the outsider in the schoolyard, the one who didn't belong. But this time, thousands of eyes were on me, cameras ready to capture every move, every flaw, every fall. I walked to the bars first, my hands already raw beneath the tape. My coach gave me a look not of doubt, but of steady resolve. I nodded back. The whistle blew, and I launched myself into the air. The crowd hushed. My swing flowed, my release soared. For a moment, I felt weightless, free of shadows. But as I prepared for the dismount, doubt flickered. My foot brushed the mat harder than it should have. A small step out of place. The score would reflect it, but I had stayed upright. I had survived the first test. Next came the beam. My old enemy. My legs trembled as I climbed, heart pounding so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. The beam stretched out before me, a thin blade daring me to slip. I took a breath and began. Every wobble felt like the end. Every shift of weight threatened disaster. At one point, my heels slid too far, my arms flailed, and the crowd gasped. For a heartbeat, I was certain I would fall, but I didn't. I clenched, corrected, steadied. When I reached the dismount and landed solidly, the gasp turned into applause, not thunderous but real. For the first time, the crowd wasn't waiting for me to fail. They were hoping I would succeed. By the time I reached the floor, exhaustion gnawed at my muscles. But this was the moment I had dreamed of. The stage where shadows died and light was earned. The music began, and I moved as if the years of pain were finally converging into this single performance. Every leap carried my past. Every tumble carried my doubt. Every spin carried my defiance. And then came the final pass. My chest was burning, my legs shaking. As I launched into the last tumbling sequence, my foot slipped slightly on takeoff. For a terrifying second, I thought I was finished. But instinct, forged from countless nights in the empty gym, saved me. I fought through, landed low, but landed. The crowd erupted not because it was perfect, but because it was defiant, because I hadn't given up. When I saluted, my vision blurred with tears. The scoreboard flashed, and I saw my name near the very top. Not hidden at the bottom, not buried in silence there, in the light. Higher than anyone expected. Higher than even I believed. The noise of the arena swelled, reporters scribbled, cameras zoomed. People who had never said my name before were now shouting it. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. But inside, it was more than a score, more than a placement. It was a victory against the ghosts, against the whispers, against the belief that my past would haunt me forever. Because in that moment, the world saw who I had become, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. When the medals were placed around my neck, when the cameras flashed and the crowd cheered, the noise around me felt distant. What echoed louder than anything else were the whispers from my past, the cruel voices of kids in the schoolyard, the doubts of strangers, the questions that haunted me in the dark. And for the first time, they didn't hurt. For the first time, I realized they had been fuel all along. I stood there in the red, white, and blue. And I thought about the little girl who once believed she didn't belong anywhere. The girl who thought adoption was a scar, not a gift. The girl who feared her past would define her forever. She was still inside me, but now she was standing taller, proud, unbroken. People always asked what it felt like to represent the United States as someone born in another country. My answer was simple. A flag is not about where you began, but about what you choose to carry forward. And that night, as the anthem played, I carried every scar, every doubt, every lonely night in the gym. I carried the weight of my past, not as chains, but as wings. The truth is, victory wasn't just about the medal. It wasn't even about the scores. It was about the silence I had shattered. For years, they said I would never belong. For years, they told me my past would haunt me forever. And yet, there I stood, not haunted but free. I thought of my mother, the woman who chose me when the world said I was unwanted. She had waited in cars through long nights, sacrificed everything for me to chase a dream that sometimes felt impossible. When our eyes met across the arena, I saw her crying, not out of relief, but out of pride. Her belief had carried me when my own failed, but I also thought of the others, watching kids, who, like me, had been told they were different, broken, less than enough. Kids who felt invisible. I wanted them to see that invisibility can become strength. That difference can become power. That scars can become stories that change everything. Because the truth is, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for anyone who has ever felt like their past defined them, for anyone who has ever looked in the mirror and wondered if they mattered, for anyone who has ever been told they didn't belong. The medal was heavy, but the freedom was heavier. And as I stood there, I realized something that would stay with me forever. Your past doesn't have to haunt you. It can guide you, it can shape you. It can be the reason you rise higher than anyone thought possible. And in that moment, I wasn't the outsider anymore. I wasn't the adopted kid with whispers chasing her. I wasn't the mistake people thought I was. I was Morgan Hurd, world champion. And the world, finally, had no choice but to see me. And that's the truth of my story. They said my past would haunt me forever, but in the end, it became the very reason I rose. I was not broken. I was not less. I was never just the girl who didn't belong. I was proof that your beginning does not decide your ending. If you carry scars, if you carry doubts, if you've ever felt invisible, remember this. Those scars are not chains. They are wings. Your story is not over, and the very things meant to break you can become the fuel that sets you free. This isn't just about gymnastics. It's about resilience. It's about refusing to let the world tell you who you are. It's about finding strength where no one else thought it could exist. And if my journey taught me anything, it's that even when the world doubts you, you can still choose to believe. If this story touched you, if it lit even a spark inside you, then don't let it fade here. Subscribe to Beyond the Game right now, because every week we bring you powerful journeys like this, stories of struggle, judgment, and redemption that will remind you of the fire inside your own life. Hit the like button so this message can reach more people who need it. And in the comments, tell us, from which country and city are you watching this story? Because no matter where you are in the world, struggle and triumph speak a universal language. Your voice belongs in this community. This was Morgan's story. But maybe, just maybe, it can be yours too.